Victoria had not expected the delivery to go wrong. Nobody expected it to go wrong. That was the nature of the word emergency. It arrived without warning and required the people who loved you to make immediate choices about what mattered most. Her parents had made their choice. Victoria had been 29 weeks pregnant when the complication had begun, a placental abruption that had required emergency surgery within hours of the first sign that something was wrong. Her husband Caleb had been at her side within 40 minutes of the call. Her sister had driven 3 hours. Her mother-in-law had arrived at the hospital before midnight. Her parents had been 45 minutes away. They had not come. The explanation had arrived in a text message, one her dad had sent from what the timestamp revealed was a restaurant, 45 minutes from the hospital, where their daughter was being prepared for emergency surgery. He had said it was late. He had said the situation sounded like it was being handled. He had said they would come in the morning. Victoria had delivered her son Eli at 2:17 in the morning, 6 weeks early, in an emergency that had required intervention her doctors had described as time-sensitive. Her parents had arrived at 11 the next morning. They had brought flowers. Victoria had received them with the specific composure of a woman who had been alone in the worst moment of her life, and had decided that what happened in that hospital was something the people in her life were eventually going to understand completely. 2 months later, her doctor threw her a baby shower and stood up at it with a piece of paper in her hand. Before Serena stands up at that baby shower and reads the timestamp out loud, hit subscribe right now. Because the moment she says Victoria delivered her son alone that night without her parents and then sits down is one of the most quietly devastating things in this entire story. New videos every single week. Hit like if you have ever needed someone to show up and had to find out they wouldn't. Drop a comment. Have you ever had someone stand up for you in a room where you couldn't stand up for yourself? Now let's go back to Raleigh, because Victoria is in that hospital room. It is 2 in the morning, and her parents are at a restaurant 45 minutes away. My name is Victoria. I am 29 years old and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I had been married to Caleb for 4 years when the pregnancy began, a pregnancy we had planned carefully and had been looking forward to with the specific joy of people who had prepared for something and had arrived at it ready. My OB was a woman named Dr. Serena Mills, who had been practicing for 15 years and who had been my physician for 2 of them. The kind of doctor whose professional precision was matched by a genuine investment in her patients that went beyond the clinical. I had trusted her completely from the first appointment. I had also, for most of my life, trusted my parents completely. The difference between those two trusts had become very clear on a Friday evening in March, when a complication had begun, and I had needed to find out which of the people I trusted were actually going to show up. The complication had started on a Friday evening at 7:45, a specific and sudden onset that I had recognized immediately as wrong in the way that pregnancy complications announce themselves, without ambiguity, in the body of a person paying attention to her body. I had called Serena's emergency line and described what I was experiencing. She had told me to go to the hospital immediately, her voice carrying the specific urgent calm of a physician who had assessed the situation and was managing their own response while managing the patient's. I had said I was on my way. I had called Caleb, who had been 20 minutes away at a work event and had left immediately. I had called my parents. And then I had driven myself to the hospital, with the focused attention of someone who understood that getting there was the most important thing she could do in the next 15 minutes. My dad had answered on the second ring. I could hear the ambient noise of a restaurant in the background, the specific acoustic quality of a room full of people and glasses and conversation. I had told him what was happening, had used the word emergency, had said the doctor had told me to go to the hospital immediately, had said I was scared and that I needed them to come. He had been calm in the way that people were sometimes calm when they had not yet fully received the weight of what they were being told. He had said, okay, what hospital? I had told him. He had said he understood and that he would talk to my mom. I had heard him say something away from the phone that I couldn't fully make out. Then he had come back on the line and said they would figure it out. I had said please come. Then I had ended the call and had focused on driving. The text had come at 9:42. I had been in the hospital for over an hour by then, in a room, being assessed by Serena and the obstetric team, the situation having been classified as a placental abruption requiring surgical intervention. The text was from my dad. It said, sounds like you are in good hands. It is getting late. We will come in the morning. Let us know how things go. 9:42 in the evening. The metadata showed the message had been sent from a location 45 minutes from the hospital. I had read it once. Then I had put my phone face down on the bed beside me and had looked at the ceiling and had done the specific breathing that Serena had taught me for managing elevated stress in a clinical situation. I had not cried. The situation did not have room for crying yet. There was too much that needed to be done first. Caleb had arrived at 8:23, had come directly from the work event still in his jacket, had walked into my room and had taken my hand without saying anything for a moment, which was exactly right. My sister Diane had called at 9, and I had told her not to come, that it was 3 hours and she had work in the morning. She had said she would see me soon and had hung up. She had arrived at 12:47. My mother-in-law Patricia had called at 10:30 when Caleb had updated her and had been at the hospital by 11:50, had brought food for Caleb because she had thought to bring food, which was the kind of practical love that Patricia had always offered. These were the people who had been in the building when my son was born. I had known all of them for less than 10 years. I had known my parents for 29. Eli was born at 2:17 in the morning, 6 weeks before his due date, in an operating room that had been prepared with the specific efficiency of a medical team, responding to something that required urgency. Serena had been there, had been present from the moment the decision to deliver had been made, had talked to me throughout the procedure in the calm, specific voice she used when she wanted her patients to feel the steadiness of her attention. Caleb had been allowed in for part of it and had held my hand through what he was allowed to be present for. Eli had arrived small and immediate and furious, the specific fury of a baby who had arrived earlier than planned and was making his presence known regardless. He had been taken to the NICU team immediately. I had seen his face for 30 seconds before they moved him. 30 seconds had been enough to understand exactly what I would have done anything to protect. My parents had arrived at 11 the next morning. I had been moved to a recovery room by then. Eli was in the NICU, and Caleb had gone home briefly to change and return. My parents came in together, my mom carrying flowers, my dad with the specific careful energy of someone entering a room where they were uncertain of their reception. My mom said the flowers were for the room. My dad said he was glad I was okay, that he had been worried, that the text updates Caleb had sent through the night had been a relief. I looked at my father, at the man who had been 45 minutes away in a restaurant when I had called, and said I needed him, and I received the flowers and I said thank you, and I did not say the other thing yet. I had decided, sometime in the hours between 2:17 and 11 the next morning, that the other thing was going to be said eventually. Just not yet, not here, not like this. Eli had spent 4 weeks in the NICU, 4 weeks of the specific suspended reality that NICU parents inhabited, the world reduced to monitors and weight measurements, and the incremental progress of a baby who had arrived before he was ready, and was doing the work of becoming ready in a room full of machines and careful hands. Victoria had been there every day, had arrived in the morning, and had stayed until the evening nurses had gently suggested she go home and rest. Caleb had been beside her for most of it. Her sister Diane had driven up twice during the 4 weeks, had sat with Victoria through the long afternoon hours when the waiting had its heaviest quality, and the company of someone who simply stayed had been worth more than anything that could have been said. Her parents had visited the NICU twice in 4 weeks. The first visit had come on day 5. Her mom had stood at the incubator glass with genuine emotion. Her dad had asked the nurse several questions about Eli's progress that had been real questions rather than performance. They stayed 40 minutes. The second visit had come on day 19, shorter, her dad checking his phone twice during it, her mom mentioning a prior commitment they needed to get to before they left. Victoria had watched both visits with the specific attention she had been bringing to her parents since the night of the delivery, noting the duration, noting the energy, noting the gap between the grandparents she had expected them to be, and the people who were standing in front of the incubator for 40 minutes before they had somewhere else to be. Dr. Serena Mills had been present through more of the NICU period than her clinical role strictly required, had stopped by Victoria's room during the recovery days, had checked in during the NICU visits on the occasions their schedules had overlapped, had maintained the specific ongoing attention of a physician who considered her responsibility to a patient to extend beyond the procedure that had been her primary clinical involvement. She had watched Caleb. She had watched Diane. She had watched Patricia. She had watched Victoria's parents during both NICU visits with the quiet observational attention of someone who had spent 15 years reading the rooms that surrounded her patients, and who understood that what happened in those rooms was part of the clinical picture she was responsible for seeing accurately. The 6-week postpartum appointment had been a Tuesday morning, Eli at home with Caleb, Victoria in Serena's office for the standard follow-up that reviewed both physical recovery and emotional well-being. Serena had gone through the clinical assessment thoroughly and then had set her clipboard down and had asked Victoria directly, not as part of a checklist, just directly, how she was actually doing. Not her incision, not her sleep, not her milk supply. How she was actually doing. Victoria had looked at her for a moment, and then she told her. She had told her about the phone call and the background restaurant noise and her dad's voice assessing whether the situation required him to leave dinner. She had told her about the text at 9:42. She had told her about the 11 o'clock arrival with the flowers. Serena had listened to everything without interrupting, with the specific complete attention she brought to information she was taking seriously. When Victoria finished, Serena had been quiet for a moment and then had asked if she could see the text exchange. Victoria had taken out her phone and had found the thread and had handed it across the desk. Serena had read through it, the call log showing the 9:42 timestamp, her dad's message, the specific language about good hands, and it is getting late and we will come in the morning. She had read it twice. She had looked at the timestamp and then at her own computer screen where Victoria's medical record was open, the admission time, the surgical preparation notes, the delivery timestamp at 2:17. She had been quiet for another moment. Then she looked at Victoria and said, "I want to throw you a baby shower." Victoria had been surprised, not by the warmth of the offer but by the specific certainty with which Serena had delivered it. The sense that the shower had been decided in the moment. She had read the text and looked at the medical record and understood the full picture of what the night of the delivery had contained. Serena had said Victoria deserved to be celebrated properly, that Eli's arrival had been difficult and significant, and that the people who had shown up for it deserved to be in a room together acknowledging what had happened. She had said she wanted to say a few words at the occasion. She had said it with the specific quality of someone who already knew what words they were going to say and had decided they needed to be said in the right room at the right time. Victoria had said yes. She had not asked what the words were going to be. The 6 weeks between the postpartum appointment and the shower had been the weeks of Eli coming home. The transition from the NICU's monitored certainty to the particular demanding intimacy of a newborn in a house. The adjustment that every new parent navigated, and that Victoria and Caleb had navigated with the specific gratitude of people who understood that having him home at all had required things to go right that could have gone wrong. Victoria had been present and focused and genuinely in the life she had built with Caleb and Eli. She had also, in the background of that life, thought about what Serena had said, about the words she intended to say, about the room she was building for the shower. She had not told her parents about the occasion. Serena had handled the invitations. Victoria had trusted her to handle them. Serena had handled the invitations entirely, had asked Victoria for the names and contact information of the people she wanted present, and had taken it from there without requiring Victoria to manage the logistics of her own celebration. Victoria had provided the list. Her close friends, Diane, Patricia, 3 colleagues from her workplace, and 2 women from her prenatal group who had become genuine friends during the pregnancy. She had not included her parents on the list she gave Serena. Serena had added them herself, had obtained the contact information through Victoria's medical records, where next of kin information was stored, and had sent them an invitation without telling Victoria she had done it. She had told Victoria afterward, simply and directly, that she had invited them and that she had her reasons. Victoria had said she understood. Serena had also invited 3 members of the medical team who had been present the night of Eli's delivery. The scrub nurse who had been in the operating room from the first preparation through the delivery, the NICU admissions nurse who had received Eli in the first minutes of his life, and the obstetric resident who had assisted Serena through the procedure. She had not explained to Victoria why she had included them beyond saying they had been part of Eli's arrival and deserved to celebrate it. Victoria had not questioned it. She had understood by then that Serena had a specific and complete picture of what she was building for the shower, and that the guest list was part of that picture in a way that would become clear when the occasion arrived. Victoria had known for 6 weeks that Serena intended to say something at the shower, had known it from the moment Serena had made the offer in the postpartum appointment, from the specific quality of certainty in her voice when she had said she had something in mind. She had not asked what it was. She had made a deliberate choice not to ask, had understood that Serena had earned the right to say what she intended to say without preview or management, and that Victoria's job was to trust the woman who had been in the operating room at 2:17 in the morning and who had been watching the full picture of the weeks that followed. She had told Caleb that Serena was going to say something at the shower. He had asked what. Victoria had said she didn't know but that she trusted it. The shower was held in a private dining room at a restaurant in the Raleigh Arts District, a space Serena had selected herself, warm and intimate, the right size for the 22 people on the guest list. It had round tables and good light, and a corner where the gifts had been arranged before guests arrived. Victoria had walked in and had felt the specific warmth of a space that had been prepared for her with genuine care and attention, the flowers and the colors Serena had somehow known she would like, the food arranged around Eli's dietary restrictions that Serena had noted in her records. She had stood in the doorway for a moment before going in. Caleb had his hand on her back. Eli was in her arms. The room had been built for her by someone who had been paying attention. She had walked in. Her parents had arrived 12 minutes after the start time together, her mom in the specific outfit she chose for family occasions that required a certain presentation, her dad with the easy social confidence he brought to rooms where he expected to be comfortable. They had greeted Victoria warmly. Her mom had taken Eli immediately and had held him with the genuine love she had for him that existed alongside everything else. Her dad had shaken Caleb's hand and had asked about work. They had moved through the room with the comfortable familiarity of people who had attended enough family occasions to understand the social geography of them. Who to speak to first, how to hold a drink, how to be present in the easy, uncomplicated way that had always been one of their genuine social skills. They had no particular reason to expect anything other than a celebration. The shower had run its natural course for the first hour and 20 minutes. Gifts opened with the specific warmth of people who had chosen them carefully and were watching someone they loved receive them. Food consumed and appreciated. Conversations that moved across the tables with the easy energy of a group of people who were genuinely glad to be celebrating something that had required difficulty to arrive at. Victoria had been present and warm and fully in it, had held Eli through most of the first hour, had passed him to Patricia, and then to Diane, and then to her mom when each of them had reached for him. The medical staff Serena had invited had integrated naturally into the group. The scrub nurse had been seated next to one of Victoria's prenatal friends and had been an animated conversation for most of the meal. Serena had stood up at the 40-minute mark of the gift opening segment, had stood up with the specific unhurried deliberateness of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and had identified it. She had a single sheet of paper in her hand, folded once, unfolded when she stood, held with both hands in the way of someone reading from something they had prepared carefully. She had said she wanted to say a few words about Victoria and about the night Eli was born. The room had given her its attention immediately, the specific quality of a group of people who recognized that someone was about to say something that mattered. Victoria had looked at Serena from across the table with the still composure of someone who had trusted a person completely and was about to find out what that trust had been holding. Serena had begun with Victoria, had opened not with the medical timeline or the clinical facts, but with the person she had known for 2 years and had watched navigate something that required more than medicine to navigate. She said Victoria was the kind of patient who asked real questions and listened to the full answer, and then asked the follow-up question that most people didn't think to ask. She said she had watched Victoria manage a high-risk pregnancy with the specific combination of discipline and genuine calm that was rarer than people understood. She said she had watched her become a mother in the most difficult possible circumstances and had seen something in that operating room at 2:17 in the morning that she wanted the people in this room to understand. The room was completely still. Victoria had her hands flat on the table. She moved to the clinical facts with the same unhurried delivery, not dramatizing them, just stating them with the precision of a physician who understood that accurate language was more powerful than emotional language when the facts themselves carried sufficient weight. She explained what a placental abruption was, the separation of the placenta from the uterine wall, the specific danger it represented for both mother and baby, the reason the word emergency was the correct word for what had happened on the Friday evening in March. She said it in the language she would have used in a medical education context, clear, specific, without softening or amplification. She said she wanted everyone in the room to understand what the word emergency meant before she continued. The room understood. She unfolded the paper fully and read the medical timeline. The first call to the hospital at 7:52, the admission at 8:19, the surgical preparation that had begun at 9:31, the delivery at 2:17 in the morning. She read each timestamp clearly, and with a brief pause after each one, not for dramatic effect, but in the way of someone who understood that numbers needed space to land properly in the minds of people receiving them for the first time. She said the timeline represented 6.5 hours from first contact to delivery. 6.5 hours during which Victoria had been in a hospital managing a situation that her doctors had classified as requiring urgent intervention. She let the 6.5 hours sit in the room before she continued. She said she wanted to acknowledge the people who had been present during those 6.5 hours. She said Caleb had arrived at 8:23, 31 minutes after Victoria had called him, from 20 minutes away, which meant he had left within minutes of receiving the call. She said Diane had driven 3 hours and had arrived at 12:47, had made a 3-hour drive in the middle of the night because her sister had needed her. She said Patricia had arrived at 11:50, had received a call at 10:30, and had been at the hospital within 80 minutes. She named each person clearly and with the specific acknowledgement of someone who believed that showing up deserved to be recognized in a room where everyone could hear it. She said, "These are the people who came." She looked at the paper in her hand and said there was one more piece of the timeline she wanted to share. She said at 9:42 in the evening, while Victoria was in the hospital in surgical preparation, while Caleb was at her side and Diane was on a highway driving through the night, a text message had been sent to Victoria. She read it aloud. She read every word of it. "The sounds like you are in good hands. It is getting late. Then we will come in the morning." She read it in the same measured delivery she had used for the medical timeline. No added emphasis, no editorial commentary, just the words exactly as they had been written. The room received them in complete silence. She said the text had been sent at 9:42 from a location 45 minutes from the hospital. She said she had looked up the distance herself, had put the restaurant's location and the hospital's location into a navigation application, and had noted the result. 45 minutes. She said she understood that people made different decisions in difficult moments, and that she was not in the room to assign judgment. She said she was in the room because she had been Victoria's physician for 2 years and had been present in the operating room at 2:17 in the morning, and had looked at a text message in a postpartum appointment, and had understood something about that night that she believed the people who loved Victoria deserved to understand too. She said she had needed the people in this room to have accurate information. She looked up from the paper and looked at the room, at the 22 people at the tables, at Victoria's friends and colleagues and family, and the medical staff who had been in the operating room and who were sitting quietly at the far table with the particular stillness of people who already knew this story and were present specifically to witness it being told. She said Victoria delivered her son alone that night without her parents. "I want everyone in this room to know that." She did not add anything after it. She did not qualify it or soften it or follow it with a pivot towards something easier. She had said the accurate thing and she had said it completely, and the room had received it completely. She folded the paper. She sat down. The room stayed quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of statement, not the uncomfortable silence of a room that didn't know what to do with what it had received, but the specific, deliberate quiet of people who were sitting with something true and were giving it the respect of not immediately filling it with sound. Victoria had her hands flat on the table and was looking at Serena, who had sat down with the same unhurried composure she had stood with, the paper folded in front of her expression carrying the settled quality of someone who had said what they had come to say and was at peace with having said it. The medical staff at the far table had not moved. Caleb had his hand on Victoria's back. Eli was in Patricia's arms across the table, oblivious and warm and completely himself. Diane had been sitting 2 seats from Victoria and had reached across the intervening chair without saying anything, had placed her hand over Victoria's on the table with the specific quiet presence of someone who understood that words were not the right instrument for this particular moment. She had driven 3 hours on a Friday night in March through the dark and had arrived at 12:47 and had sat with her sister through the hours that followed, and she did not need to say any of that because it was already in the room. Serena had put it there, clearly and specifically, and it was sitting at the table alongside everything else that was true about that night. Victoria had looked at her sister's hand on hers and had turned her hand over and had held it. Her parents were seated at the far end of the main table. Her mom had been holding Eli when Serena stood up, and had passed him to Patricia sometime during the medical timeline, which meant her arms were empty and her hands were in her lap when Serena read the text aloud. Victoria had been aware of her parents' position in the room throughout Serena's remarks in the specific peripheral way. She had been aware of things that mattered without looking at them directly. Her mom's expression when Victoria finally looked at her was the one that arrived when something private had been made public without warning. The specific exposure of a person who had been operating on the assumption that certain things stayed contained and had just discovered they did not. The scrub nurse, whose name was Deanna, and who had been in the operating room from the first preparation through the delivery, and who had apparently decided that being present at the shower meant being present fully, had looked down the table at Victoria's dad and had asked him a direct question. She had asked it in the even professional tone of someone accustomed to asking direct questions in rooms where directness was necessary. She had asked what had kept them from coming that night. She had asked it without aggression and without the performance of anger, just with the specific directness of a woman who had stood in an operating room at 2 in the morning and had seen what she had seen and was now sitting at a table with the people who had not been there and wanted to understand why. Victoria's dad had opened his mouth and had said something about the situation having seemed managed, had reached for the same language the text had used, the good hands language, the late evening language. Victoria had looked at him while he said it and had not helped him. She had not provided the rescue that family members sometimes provided when one of their own was struggling in a room. The redirect, the subject change, the gentle interjection that allowed the difficult moment to be moved past before it was fully received. She had let the question stand, and had let his answer stand beside it, and had let the room sit with both. Deanna had looked at him for a moment after he finished and had not said anything further. The answer had been sufficient. It had confirmed what it needed to confirm. Her mom had found her in the hallway outside the private dining room, near the end of the shower, had appeared beside her, while Victoria was on her way back from the restroom, in the specific way of someone who had been waiting for a moment away from the table. Her mom had looked at her, had really looked at her, in the way that required setting down the social performance that usually occupied that level of eye contact, and had said something. She had not said they had been worried but hadn't wanted to disrupt the evening. She had not said the situation had seemed under control. She had said, "I should have come." She had said it quietly and without elaboration, and without the defensive framing that would have made it into something other than what it was. It was not enough, and both of them knew it. It was also, for the first time, true. Victoria had carried Eli to the car herself, had buckled him into the car seat with the specific practice care of a mother who had spent 4 weeks watching NICU nurses handle her son and had learned from every one of them. Caleb had driven. She had sat in the passenger seat with her hand resting lightly on Eli's car seat and had looked at the Raleigh streets moving past the window. The shower was behind them. Serena's paper was folded in her bag. Serena had given it to her before she left, had pressed it into her hands, and said she thought Victoria should have it. The night of the delivery was no longer only in Victoria's memory and Caleb's and the medical record. It was in the room now. It was part of the story that the people who loved her carried. She looked at Eli in the mirror, small and perfect, and entirely unaware of what had been said on his behalf that afternoon. She thought about what Serena had done and felt the specific gratitude of someone who had been seen completely by the right person at the right time. Caleb reached across and put his hand over hers briefly. She looked at the road ahead. She was glad to be going home.